You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
A forgotten tape, a missing woman, and a house that hides more than just memories. When ex-reporter Jack Bennett stumbles upon an old camcorder at an estate sale, he expects nothing more than a nostalgic relic. But what he finds is something far more chilling. A tape containing the final moments of Claire Holloway, a woman who vanished 5 years ago. Her desperate plea echoes through time. If you're watching this, he got me. With the help of a determined detective, Jack dives into a mystery long buried in Raven City's shadows. Who was he? What really happened in that house? And was the former owner, revered businessman Charles Delaney, hiding a deadly secret? But the deeper they dig, the more Jack realizes some truths were never meant to be uncovered. Some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some shadows never fade. Subscribe and follow for more mysteries. Chapter 1. The Estate Sale. It was one of those grey autumn afternoons when the sun never truly rises, leaving the world in a permanent dusk. A damp chill clung to the air, and a fine drizzle slicked the sidewalks of Raven City. The estate sale was nearly over by the time I arrived, drawn by idle curiosity and the hope of a cheap find. The old Delaney house loomed at the end of Sycamore Street, an aging Victorian beast crouched behind an iron gate, its once white paint peeling like dead skin. I could smell the wet leaves and rot in the unkempt front garden as I stepped through the gate, joining a few lingering bargain hunters under the sagging porch. Inside, the air was stale with the odour of dust and old wood. The entry hall's high ceiling disappeared into shadows, and each footstep on the oak floorboards produced a groan that echoed through the empty rooms. I ran my fingers along a mahogany banister, feeling grit and neglect under my touch. Tables were laid out with the detritus of a life: porcelain figurines, tarnished silverware, stacks of yellowed books. Dim light filtered through stained glass windows, painting everything in murky hues of green and amber, as if we were underwater in a stagnant pond. I wandered through with my hands in my coat pockets, shoulders hunched against the damp cold that even indoors refused to release me. My nose caught a sharp whiff of something chemical, old polish or cleaning fluid, fighting a losing battle against mildew buried deep in the wallpaper. Every breath tasted like dust. From somewhere in the parlour, a grandfather clock chimed faintly, off-kilter and mournful, unsure of the time after years of disuse. On a side table in the study, half hidden behind a stack of leather-bound photo albums, I spotted an old camcorder. It was a bulky model, early 2000s maybe, encased in scuffed black plastic with a worn hand strap. A relic from the days before every phone had a camera. I picked it up, surprised by its weight. The plastic felt cold and slightly tacky, as if it had been left in a damp basement. A small label on the side of the tape slot was blank and yellowed with age, likely marking whatever tape was still inside. "Everything on that table is half off," came a voice from behind me. I turned to see an estate sale attendant, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a forced smile. She looked like she'd been breathing the same dust all day. Mr. Delaney had quite the collection of electronics. If you're interested in the camera, I can give it to you for $10. $10 for an old camcorder seemed fair, even if just for nostalgia's sake. I pressed the power toggle, but nothing happened. The battery was long dead. "Do you know if it still works?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the near-empty foyer. "Should." "He kept good care of his things," she replied with a shrug. Her eyes drifted around the room, clearly impatient to close up. "There's a charger somewhere. Tell you what, I'll throw in any camera stuff I can find if you take it. I'm tired of looking at all this." She attempted a laugh, but it came out thin and strained. I glanced at the table and found a small pile of cables and accessories next to the camcorder. Sure enough, one of the cords looked like a charger that would fit. I scooped it up. "Deal," I said, pulling out my wallet. As I handed over a 10 and she fished for change, a prickle crept up the back of my neck, an eerie sensation of being watched. I paused and cast a look over my shoulder. In the far corner of the hallway, a man stood partially in shadow. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a maintenance worker's coveralls. His face was obscured by the dim light, but I caught the glint of eyes watching me, reflecting the feeble glow of a table lamp. He wasn't browsing or holding any items. He just stood there, silent, half hidden behind a china cabinet. I offered a polite nod, but he didn't respond. After a moment, he turned and slipped through a doorway toward the back of the house, disappearing without a sound. Something about the way he moved, so quietly, so deliberately, made my skin crawl. "Have a good evening," the attendant said, handing me the plastic bag with the camera and charger. I noticed she avoided making eye contact, her gaze skittering past me toward the dark hallway where the man had been. Perhaps she had seen him too, a look of unease flickering on her face. I considered asking who that man was, maybe a remaining family member or a worker wrapping up. But the woman immediately busied herself with stacking some unsold books, the matter evidently closed. I stepped back out into the drizzle, pulling my threadbare coat tighter around me. The chill immediately cut through to my bones. Autumn rain in Raven City always carries a bite, a cold that seeps under the skin. I walked down the cracked stone path to the street, past rusting lawn ornaments half sunk in weeds. Behind me, the old house stood silent, its dark windows like eyes following my departure. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd taken something more than I'd paid for from that place. By the time I reached my apartment, night had fallen and the drizzle had matured into a steady rain. A dense fog wreathed the street lamps, diffusing their light into a hazy glow. My building was a rickety 3-story walk-up above a shuttered pawn shop. As I climbed the stairs, the worn wooden steps creaked in protest. The scent of frying onions from a neighbor's kitchen briefly overpowered the usual cocktail of stale cigarette smoke and damp wood in the hallway. One bulb hung overhead, flickering weakly and casting jittery shadows along the peeling wallpaper. Inside my apartment, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Home, if you could call it that, was one large room with a small bath off to the side, a space that served as my living room, bedroom, and office all at once. It wasn't much. Paint peeling in cracked maps off the ceiling, a radiator that clanked and hissed without ever actually warming the place, and second-hand furniture scarred by prior lives. But it was mine. I tossed my keys onto the wobbly side table by the door and set the plastic bag on the couch, which also doubled as my bed on late nights. The quiet was heavy here, broken only by the steady drip of a leaky kitchen faucet. I shrugged off my coat, hung it on the back of a chair, and ran a hand through my damp hair. Curiosity tugged at me as I eyed the camcorder. I didn't have much else to do this evening. No pressing freelance assignment, no dinner plans, nothing but the company of my own solitude and the rhythmic patter of rain against the window. The silence made the room feel colder. I crossed to the tiny kitchenette and poured a couple fingers of whiskey into a stained glass tumbler. The first sip burned, a welcome heat sliding down my throat to coil in my stomach. It took the edge off the lingering unease from the estate sale. What was it about that house that had me so jumpy? I'd been in countless dusty old places during my years chasing stories, and I wasn't one to spook easily. Perhaps I was just out of practice. These days, my investigative reporting had slowed to a trickle of mundane copywriting jobs to pay the bills. Glass in hand, I returned to the couch and pulled out the camcorder. I found a spot on the wall outlet and plugged in the charger cord. For a few seconds, nothing happened, and I tapped my finger impatiently on the device. Then a tiny red LED blinked on. The camcorder whirred faintly, like something awakening from a long sleep. I flipped out the small LCD screen on the side and pressed the power button. At first, I saw nothing but grainy darkness. The camcorder's speaker hissed with a soft static, and I could hear a low hum, maybe the tape's background noise. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, squinting at the little screen. Slowly, an image began to materialize from the void. The camera was pointed at a dimly lit room. The only light seemed to come from a small lamp or candle set on the floor, casting feeble flickers. A woman's face suddenly filled the frame. I sucked in a breath. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, with tear-streaked cheeks and eyes wide with terror. The night vision mode had been engaged, tinting everything in a ghostly green, but I could still make out the frantic rise and fall of her chest as she tried to catch her breath. She looked directly into the camera, as if into my eyes, and the sheer panic in her expression made my skin prickle. Her voice came through the tiny speaker in a trembling whisper. I don't have much time." She spoke quietly, each word hitching. I leaned even closer, the scent of cold electronics and dust filling my nostrils as I watched, transfixed. In the background of the shot, I could just make out wallpaper with a faded rose pattern and part of a dark doorway behind her. Wherever she was, it was silent, except for her ragged breathing. Suddenly, on the video, a floorboard creaked from somewhere off camera. The woman's head jerked toward the sound, eyes growing somehow wider. A surge of protective instinct jolted through me, useless and absurd across whatever years separated me from that moment on tape. She quickly turned back to the lens, her face now so close that only one wild, glistening eye and half her mouth were visible. "His name is..." She began in a hushed rush, but she didn't finish the sentence. There was a loud crash, like a door being thrown open violently. The camera image jolted with motion. The woman gasped, and I heard her cry out a single muffled yelp of fear. She lunged forward and hissed urgently, "If you're watching this, he got me." In the same second, the picture broke into jagged lines of static. A harsh screeching sound burst from the speaker, and then, nothing. The screen went black as the tape stopped or was cut off abruptly. I realized I had stopped breathing. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat heavy and loud in the stillness of my apartment. I sat frozen, the empty whiskey tumbler trembling in my other hand. The words the woman had whispered rang in my ears as if she were in the room with me. "If you're watching this, he got me." For a long moment, I just stared at the camcorder's blank screen, hoping it would flicker back to life, that her face would reappear and tell me more, anything. But the device only whirred softly, the tape at its end. I swallowed, my mouth dry and tasting of copper. At some point, I'd bitten the inside of my cheek. Gently, I set the glass down, suddenly aware of how stiff my fingers had become from gripping it. A gust of wind rattled my window, making me flinch. Outside, the rain tapped insistently on the glass, and somewhere far off in the city, a siren wailed. I rubbed a clammy hand over my face, trying to dispel the image of the woman's terror. But I knew, even in that instant, that nothing would dispel it. She had looked into the camera, into me, and delivered what sounded like a plea and a warning from beyond the grave. I replayed that last line in my head, my thoughts already racing. Who was she? Who was he? What had happened in that house? The hairs on my arms stood on end. In the silence that followed, I felt that I was not entirely alone. I glanced around my small apartment, half expecting to see a phantom standing in the corner, but there was only the drip of the faucet and the dim glow of the camcorder's power light. I was alone, with a message that was never meant for me, but which had nonetheless found me. And in that lonely, fog-shrouded night, one thing became horrifyingly clear. Whatever door I had opened by pressing play, there was no going back now. I had seen her and heard her. Her fear had leached out of the tape and into my veins. "If you're watching this, he got me," she had said. I was watching. He had gotten her. I sat in the darkness for a long time, the taste of dread coating my tongue, wondering what I was supposed to do next. The camcorder screen had gone dark, but the nightmare it contained was just beginning to flicker to life in my world. Chapter 2. The Missing Woman. I hardly slept at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the woman's whisper played on loop in my head, and I'd jolt awake, heart pounding. At one point I dreamed I was back in the Delaney house, wandering those dim corridors with the camcorder's night vision illuminating the path. In the dream, walls loomed and warped, the rose-patterned wallpaper bleeding color, and somewhere in the bowels of the house I heard a woman weeping. I followed the sound to a door. When I yanked it open, all I found was the camcorder, sitting on the floor and recording me. I woke up with a start, sheets tangled around my legs and sweat on my brow, the taste of fear bitter on my tongue. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Weak, colorless light filtered through the gaps in my blinds, revealing my cramped apartment in all its shabbiness. I sat at the small table by the window with a cup of stale coffee, the camcorder in front of me. I had rewound the tape and played it twice more in the early hours, hoping to glean some detail I missed. Each viewing only made my stomach tighten further. On the second watch, I hit pause just after she said, "His name is..." In the frozen frame, her face was blurred by motion, but I could see utter terror etched in her eyes. "His name is... who?" The crash came right as she was about to reveal it. The frustration was maddening. The tape cut out so conveniently at that critical moment, almost as if someone had intentionally stopped or destroyed it. Did she manage to hide the tape before he got to her? Given that I found it in the camcorder at an estate sale 5 years later, it seemed likely. I drummed my fingers on the table, then took a gulp of coffee. It was lukewarm and acidic, but I welcomed the jolt of caffeine. I needed a clear head. I needed to think. The first question was obvious. Who was the woman on the tape? She wasn't anyone I recognized personally, but something about her face tugged at the edge of my memory. It could be just the universality of fear. Anyone in such terror might look similar. Still, I had a nagging feeling I'd seen her before, perhaps on TV or in a newspaper. That thought sparked a connection. I pushed my chair back and went to my desk, a rickety wooden thing overwhelmed by piles of old papers, notebooks, and a beaten-up laptop. I flipped open the computer and tapped the trackpad to wake it up. The screen cast a pale glow in the dim morning light. A few years ago, when I was still working the crime beat for the Raven City Herald, I recall a string of news about missing persons. One case in particular, the disappearance of a young woman, had grabbed headlines for weeks. There'd been candlelight vigils, flyers plastered all over the city. Could the woman on the tape be her? I quickly typed a search query, Raven City missing woman 5 years ago. Dozens of results appeared, news articles, forum discussions, a community Facebook page for local missing persons. I refined it with a name that floated up from memory. Claire. Yes, Claire something. Claire Holloway? No, Holloway. I added Claire Holloway Raven City missing to the search. That did it. Several hits popped up, including a Raven City Herald article from 5 years back. I clicked it, my pulse quickening. The webpage was slow to load, my ancient laptop chugging as usual, but soon I saw a photo of a smiling brunette woman and a headline, "Local woman Claire Holloway still missing. 1 month later, police stumped." I leaned closer. The photo was a warm, candid shot of her outdoors in sunlight, perhaps mid-20s, brown hair, kind eyes. It took only a little imagination to match her to the frightened face on the tape. The hair in the video was mussed and maybe a shade darker in that night vision green. And of course her expression was nothing like the smile here, but the shape of the face, the eyes, it was her. I felt a cold certainty in my gut. According to the article, Claire Holloway was last seen 5 years ago, leaving her job at a downtown boutique one evening, and she never made it home. Her car was found in the store parking lot. No sign of struggle, no witnesses. She was simply gone. The case had gone cold after a few months of fruitless searching. I clicked through a few more articles and learned that Claire had been 26 at the time. A college grad, aspiring artist, a life full of potential. Vanished without a trace. The tone of the articles was grim. There were quotes from her distraught younger sister and parents pleading for information. A few pieces speculated about possible suspects. A known sex offender in the area, later cleared by alibi, a co-worker with a shaky history, also cleared. Nowhere was there mention of a Charles Delaney, the owner of the house where I found the camcorder. In fact, nowhere was there any mention of a camcorder or video message at all. My heart thudded with a mix of excitement and dread. If this tape truly showed Claire Holloway, it could break open a 5-year mystery. It also meant that Claire's fate was almost certainly a tragic one. She had effectively recorded her own epitaph. "If you're watching this, he got me." She knew she was going to be killed. I took a deep breath and rubbed my palms over my face. The rational part of me insisted the next step was obvious. I needed to go to the police with this tape. This was evidence, explosive evidence in a kidnapping, possibly a murder. But another part of me, the stubborn reporter instinct that never quite died even after I left the Herald, held back. I'd seen how police handle old cases and new evidence. Sometimes they were grateful, but other times they were defensive, territorial. And if whoever he was had somehow escaped suspicion all this time, what were the chances he had friends or influence that helped him stay off the radar? There was also the matter of how I came to have the tape. I'd picked it up at the estate sale of Charles Delaney, a recently deceased man who, to my knowledge, had never been publicly implicated in Claire's case. If I marched into the precinct with this, I might end up entangled in red tape for days. The cops could decide to confiscate the tape, and I'd be on the sidelines. Worst of all, if there was any corruption or complicity involved in keeping Delaney off the suspect list, tipping them off prematurely could give someone a chance to destroy other evidence. I realized I was tapping a pen anxiously on the desk. I set it down. I needed advice, but who to trust? For a moment, I considered calling my old editor, Ben Alvarez. He'd always had good instincts on this kind of stuff, and I knew he hated unsolved cases. But Ben was a journalist, not a detective. He'd tell me to go to the police or let him write a piece. If I went to him now, I could lose control of the story. And this felt personal, much more than a story. Instead, I found myself reaching for my phone and scrolling through contacts until I landed on a name: Marcus Hayes. Detective Hayes and I had crossed paths a few times back in my reporting days. He was a straight shooter, one of the rare ones on the force I felt I could trust. I remembered he was involved peripherally in the Holloway case, though it hadn't been his case directly. If anyone would listen with an open mind, it'd be him. My thumb hovered over the call button. It was still quite early, just past 7 a.m. He might not appreciate being dragged into something on his off day, assuming he even remembered me. I decided a text might be gentler. "Hey Mark, it's Jack Bennett." I typed, "I know it's been a while, but I've come across something important regarding the Claire Holloway case. Can we talk? It's urgent." I reread the message twice before sending, trying to strike the right tone of urgent but not crazy. While I waited for a response, I prepared myself for the possibility that none might come. Cops get tons of tips and important information from cranks. Marcus might ignore me or tell me to call the tip line. I hoped dropping Claire's name and my own would at least pique his interest enough to respond. I stood and began to pace the length of my apartment, which took all of 5 steps from door to window. My senses felt heightened, edgy. The bitter dregs of coffee in my mug smelled more acrid than usual. The ticking of the second hand on my wall clock sounded like a thud inside my skull. After 5 minutes of no reply, I found myself peering out through the blinds, looking at the street below where early commuters trudged through puddles and mist. Raven City looked cleaner after a night of rain, but the freshness only ran skin deep. I knew this city's underbelly too well. There were secrets washed into the gutters that would never see daylight if people in power had their way. A vibration in my hand startled me. I looked down to see a text from Marcus flash on the screen. "Jack, long time. Call me in 10. He included a number, likely a personal cell or a burner. Relief and anxiety warred in my chest as I watched the minutes tick by. I occupied myself by grabbing the camcorder and carefully ejecting the tape. It was a mini DV cassette, the kind that held maybe an hour of footage. The label was indeed blank. With reverence, I slid it into a plastic case I found in the bag of accessories. I wanted to make sure nothing happened to it. Briefly, I considered copying the footage to a digital file as backup, but my laptop lacked the ports to connect the camcorder and I didn't have the right cable. That would have to wait. Finally, I dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring with a gruff, "Hayes." "Marcus, it's Jack Bennett," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Thanks for getting back to me." "Sure, you said you have something on the Holloway case? That's a hell of a blast from the past, Jack." He sounded more guarded than friendly, but at least he hadn't blown me off. "I do," I replied, taking a deep breath. I found a video, Marcus. A video of Claire Holloway. It's dated, but a video? What do you mean? From when?" His tone sharpened, skepticism and sudden interest. "From what I can tell, it's from around the time she disappeared. She's in trouble. On the video, Claire says, 'If you're watching this, he got me.' It cuts off right after. She tried to name someone. His name is, but the recording stops. There was silence on the line. I heard him exhale. "This a joke, Bennett? Because if it is, it's not funny." "I know how it sounds," I said quickly, "but I swear it's real." I wouldn't play around with something like this. I got the tape by accident, at an estate sale of all places. Marcus cursed under his breath. Estate sale? Jesus. Okay, start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out. I told him everything, how I wandered into the Delaney estate sale, how I bought the camcorder on a whim, and what I saw on the tape. I mentioned the name Delaney deliberately to see if it rang a bell, but Marcus didn't interrupt. As I recounted the woman's words, I heard him let out a low whistle. When I finished, Marcus was silent for a few beats. Finally, he said, "Charles Delaney. I know that name. The guy died a couple of weeks ago, right? Rich old bachelor, big house on Sycamore? That's him. I remember seeing something in the obit, so you're telling me this tape was in his camcorder?" "Exactly, and no one knew. It must have been sitting there for years." "Damn." Marcus's voice dropped as if to prevent anyone around from overhearing, though it sounded like he was alone. "Listen, Jack, you did right to call me. Officially, Holloway is a cold case that's been dormant. Unofficially, some of us always felt something was off about how it went cold. Evidence was slim, yeah, but it died faster than it should have, like someone wanted it to." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "You think someone interfered?" "I don't know, but this new evidence, if it holds up, changes everything." He paused. "You still at the same address?" I hesitated. "Yes. You want to come here?" "I'll come. I want to see that tape with my own eyes. And Jack, don't tell anyone else. Not yet. We don't know who might be involved, and if Delaney has any family or associates still around." "I understand," I interrupted. I'd already decided to keep this close. "I haven't told a soul besides you." "Good. Sit tight. I'll be there in an hour, give or take. And Jack," he added, "keep that tape safe. That's evidence now. Chain of custody and all that." "I will. Drive safe." We hung up. I exhaled slowly and set the phone down. It occurred to me that Marcus was treating me more like a partner in this than I expected. Perhaps my years of covering crimes had earned some respect after all, or maybe he was just desperate for a break in a case that had haunted him too. Either way, the wheels were now in motion. Part of me was relieved to hand this off to someone with a badge, but another part of me, the restless part that had spent years digging up secrets in Raven City, wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. I realized I wanted to see this through, to personally uncover what happened to Claire and how that old man Delaney had been involved. While waiting for Marcus, I decided to do a bit more digging on Charles Delaney himself. What did I know about him? Very little, other than local whispers. I recalled that the Delaney name carried some weight in town, old money perhaps. If he died a couple weeks ago, there might be an obituary or article about it. I fired up the search again. Charles Delaney Raven City obituary. Sure enough, a result popped up from the Raven City Gazette. Philanthropist and retired businessman Charles Delaney dies at 76. I clicked it. A black and white portrait of the man loaded on the screen. Even in the small photo, Delaney's eyes looked sharp, almost hawk-like, under bushy grey brows. The piece was glowing. He had been a generous donor to local hospitals and museums, a patron of the arts and a respected community figure. No mention of surviving family, just a distant nephew to handle the estate. There was a line about how he passed peacefully in his sleep at his home on Sycamore Street. Peacefully in his sleep, I mused darkly, unlike Claire. I noticed one interesting detail. The obituary listed a memorial service that had happened last week and noted that Delaney had a personal nurse and a caretaker in his final years, given he had been ill. It did not name the caretaker. The caretaker. I thought of the gaunt man in coveralls I'd seen lurking at the sale. Could that have been him? If the tape was evidence of a crime Delaney committed, might the caretaker know something? Or worse, might the caretaker have been involved? A knock at my door jolted me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the clock. Nearly an hour had passed. I crossed the room, heart thumping. "Who is it?" "Hayes," came the muffled reply. I opened up, and Detective Marcus Hayes stepped inside, bringing the scent of damp leather and coffee with him. He wore a plain grey suit, a bit rumpled, with a long overcoat, and he carried an air of both authority and wariness. His dark hair was thinning, and there were more lines on his face than I remembered, but his eyes were alert. We shook hands briefly. "Jack," he greeted with a curt nod. His gaze swept my apartment, taking in the clutter, the camcorder on the table, and likely the circles under my eyes. You look like hell. I feel it, I admitted. Rough night. I bet. He set a travel mug on my counter and shrugged off his overcoat. A waft of cool, rain-scented air lingered behind. All right, let's see this tape. I led him to the table where I'd laid out the camcorder. I gently placed the mini DV tape back in and cued it to the beginning. Marcus pulled over a second chair, sitting down next to me so we could both see the tiny screen. I hit play. I watched Marcus's face more than the video this time. Even the seasoned detective couldn't hide his reaction. His eyes narrowed as soon as Claire's face came into view. By the time she delivered her fateful message, his jaw was set tight. When the static hit, he let out a breath I suspect he'd been holding. Again, he said. I rewound and we watched it once more in silence. When it was over, Marcus leaned back and ran a hand over his mouth, his 5 o'clock shadow rasping under his palm. That's her. Holy hell, that's Claire Holloway, he muttered. 5 years missing, and she was right there in that house the whole time? It appears so, I said quietly. Just hearing him confirm it made the reality weigh heavier. She tried to say a name. It could have been Delaney's or someone else's. Marcus nodded. Possibly his name is Charles, or his name is Delaney. Hard to say. But the tape cut out, likely when the assailant grabbed her or the camera. He frowned deeply, anger flashing in his eyes. If we had found this 5 years ago. Neither of us needed to finish that sentence. If the tape had surfaced then, Claire might have been found, dead or alive, and Delaney would have faced justice in his lifetime. But he died a free, lauded man. Marcus stood and began to pace my small space, much as I had earlier. He was radiating energy now, a coiled intensity. We'll need to formally enter this into evidence, but I want to be careful. He looked at me. You mentioned you saw a guy at the sale, possibly a caretaker. Did you get a good look or name? I shook my head. Not much of a look. Tall, thin, wearing coveralls. The estate obit mentioned he had a caretaker in final years, but no name. Could be that guy. He gave me a bad feeling. If he was around Delaney a lot, maybe he knew, or even helped cover it up. It's possible, Marcus said, brow furrowed. We'll need to find out who he is. The estate would have records. Maybe the nephew or the attorney handling it could give a name. He rubbed the back of his neck. And we should talk to Claire's family. God, telling them this after all this time. He trailed off, and I saw genuine sorrow in his expression. I remembered that Marcus had a daughter around Claire's age back then. Perhaps he'd empathized with the Holloways. You think we should loop them in already? I asked. What if it raises false hopes? Marcus considered. We won't show them the tape yet, but they deserve to know we have a new lead. Claire's sister Julia was persistent even after the official search ended. She might help with information, like recognizing the wallpaper or anything Claire might have mentioned. Julia, I echoed, recalling the name from the articles. Yes, I remember reading about her. She spearheaded a lot of the awareness campaigns. She did. She's tough. He checked his watch. I'll arrange to speak with her, preferably in person, soon as possible. As he spoke, I noticed Marcus's demeanor shifting into official mode, ticking through tasks out loud. I felt a pang of exclusion, like the story was about to leave my hands and become purely a police matter. Selfishly or not, I wasn't ready to step away yet. I cleared my throat. Marcus, I want to help. I mean, I've already stuck my neck in this. Let me stay in the loop. I can look into some things unofficially. He gave me a measured look. Jack, I appreciate what you've done, and I get that you have an attachment here. But this could become dangerous, especially if others were involved. I don't want a civilian getting hurt or contaminating evidence. I was a reporter for 10 years, I argued gently. I know how to handle dangerous situations and sensitive info, and I'm the one who found this. Whoever was responsible might already be aware that the tape is out, especially if that caretaker saw me leave with the camcorder. Marcus considered that, his lips thinning. You think he knew the tape was in there? If he was involved, maybe, maybe not. But he did watch me buy it. If he realized later what I might have, he could come looking for it. Even voicing that possibility made my heart rate tick up. Marcus nodded slowly. You might be right, and if so, you could be a target now. A silence hung between us at those words, target. I hadn't fully processed it in my zeal to find the truth, but yes, if someone killed Claire and thought they got away with it, The last thing they'd want is evidence surfacing. And here I was holding that evidence. Marcus broke the silence. All right, but we do this properly. The first step is getting this tape logged at the precinct. We can make a copy for us to work from, but the original needs to be secured as evidence. Will you come with me and give a statement? It'll help establish the chain of custody, that you found it and gave it to us. I swallowed. Going to the precinct meant moving this firmly into official territory. But Marcus was right. We needed to protect the tape. Yeah, let's do it. He gave a quick, firm nod. Good. And Jack, don't worry, I'll keep you involved as much as I can. Sometimes an outside perspective helps, especially someone who knows how to dig like you do. But I need to be able to trust you. You can trust me, I replied. I just want to see justice for Claire. The detective's eyes softened a fraction. So do I. I packed the camcorder and tape carefully in my backpack. Before we left, I threw on a fresh shirt and my coat and scribbled a few notes to myself on a pad, ideas to follow up on later. Caretaker, find name, check Delaney financials, compare missing persons around that time, Claire's diary. I doubted Claire's family would have any insight into Delaney, but maybe she had mentioned a job or appointment near when she vanished. There was so much unknown. We stepped out into the morning, which was brighter now, the fog lifting. Marcus insisted we take his car, so we headed to where he'd parked. The city was waking up. Car horns, the rumble of a garbage truck down the block, the smell of rain-soaked pavement mixing with the aroma of fresh coffee from a street vendor on the corner. I suddenly realized I hadn't eaten, and my stomach clenched, but I felt too anxious to bother with food. As we climbed into Marcus's unmarked sedan, a black Ford that had seen better days, I caught myself glancing around, scanning the street for, what, a gaunt face in coveralls? A phantom old man? Everything seemed normal. A jogger splashing through a puddle, a man in a delivery uniform unloading packages, a couple huddled under an umbrella at the bus stop. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that a pair of unseen eyes were on me. I shivered and told myself it was just paranoia. Marcus started the engine, and as we pulled away, I tried to focus on the road ahead. But in the reflection of the side mirror, I thought I glimpsed a figure standing at the far end of the street, near an alley. Someone watching. I blinked, and the figure was gone, if it was ever there at all. I sat back and closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. This is what happens when you jump into the rabbit hole, I told myself. You start seeing shadows where there might be none. Still, I couldn't dismiss the creeping unease that the rabbit hole might be looking back at me. As we headed downtown toward the police precinct, I braced myself. The tape was about to blow open a long, dormant case, and possibly expose the dark secrets of a man everyone had thought honorable. Claire's words echoed in my mind again, resolute and haunting. If you're watching this, he got me. I was watching. And I was going to make sure that he, whoever he was, would finally be got too. As Jack and Marcus drive toward the precinct, an unshakable feeling of being watched settles over him, the weight of the tape burning in his bag like a ticking time bomb. Somewhere out there, someone knows the truth, and if they've stayed hidden this long, they won't let it surface without a fight. The past is clawing its way back to the light, and Jack is about to learn that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. To be continued.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.